What if the oldest kingdom in the world was not imagined above the earth, beneath the sky, or among the stars, but below the waters, not simply underwater in the way modern people picture ruins swallowed by the sea, with broken columns resting in blue darkness and fish drifting through palace gates? The Sumerian imagination was stranger than that. It described a deep region beneath the visible world, a hidden domain of waters older than cities, older than kings, older even than the first human hands that pressed signs into clay. This place was called the Abzu. To the ancient people of southern Mesopotamia, water was never just water. It was life, terror, fertility, boundary, memory, and abyss. Rivers created the land, floods erased it, canals fed the cities, and marshes concealed pathways that seemed to dissolve into the horizon. The world itself appeared to rise out of water, and beneath that world, the scribes preserved the idea of another realm, invisible but powerful, a sacred depth where divine wisdom slept. Could this be the lost kingdom hidden beneath the deepest ocean? The ancient texts do not describe a modern oceanic empire with streets of gold and glass towers under the sea. Archaeologists have not uncovered a Sumerian Atlantis buried beneath the Indian Ocean or the Pacific. But the texts do speak of a hidden watery domain, ruled by one of the most mysterious gods in Mesopotamian religion. They speak of secret knowledge, divine plans, creation, purification, and the boundary between life and death. They speak as though beneath the human world there was another order of existence. And that is where the mystery begins. Imagine southern Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago. Not a desert empire of stone pyramids, but a world of mud brick cities rising from a flat, shimmering plain. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers moved through the land like living beings. Their channels changed. Their floods could bless or destroy. In the distance were reed marshes, vast, whispering landscapes of water, birds, boats, and hidden paths. The sky seemed enormous. The earth seemed fragile. Civilization survived only because people learned to bargain with water. A city was not merely a settlement. It was a claim against chaos. Every wall, canal, granary, and temple said the same thing: humans could create order where nature threatened to swallow everything. But who taught them? In Sumerian tradition, wisdom did not simply emerge from human cleverness. It came from the divine. It came from powers older than the city. And among those powers, Enki was one of the most important. Later known in Akkadian as Ea, Enki was associated with wisdom, magic, crafts, creation, fresh water, and the hidden deep. He was not usually imagined as a storming war god or a distant ruler of the sky. He was subtle. He was clever. He knew secrets. He could save humanity through a whispered warning. He could shape destiny through speech. And his realm was the Abzu. Here, we must be careful. What ancient texts describe is a sacred cosmic domain. What archaeologists know is that temples, ritual basins, canal systems, marshlands, and freshwater sources were central to Mesopotamian life. What historians believe is that the Abzu was both a religious concept and a reflection of how Mesopotamians understood the waters beneath and around their world. What modern interpretations sometimes suggest is more daring, that behind this sacred deep there may be memories of drowned landscapes, ancient coastal changes, or lost knowledge encoded in myth. But interpretation is not proof. Still, the question refuses to disappear. Why did one of humanity's earliest literate civilizations imagine divine wisdom not in the heavens, but in the waters below? Picture a priest entering a temple court before dawn. The air is cool. Oil lamps tremble. The first light touches the high walls of mud brick somewhere nearby. Water glints in a basin, still and dark. To modern eyes, it might seem ordinary, but to the people who serve the gods, ritual water could represent contact with the deepest order of creation. It washed away impurity. It opened sacred space. It mirrored the hidden waters from which life itself arose. The Abzu was not just a place. It was an idea of origin. In Mesopotamian thought, the world was layered. Heaven above, earth in the middle, the underworld below, and waters surrounding or underlying creation. These categories changed across regions and centuries, but one theme remained powerful. Water existed before organized life, before fields, before temples, before kingship. There was the deep, not empty nothingness, but potential, a dark fullness waiting to be shaped. This is where the mystery becomes more unsettling. Many cultures place creation at the edge of water. Egypt imagined the primeval waters before the first mound rose. Biblical tradition opens with darkness upon the face of the deep. Greek myths preserve Oceanus and primordial seas. Indian traditions speak of cosmic waters. These comparisons do not mean all these cultures told the same story, nor do they prove a single lost civilization beneath the ocean. But they reveal something profound. Early civilizations repeatedly imagined water as the memory before the world. Why? Perhaps because every human being begins in water. Perhaps because floods teach that land is temporary. Perhaps because ancient people watched river mud produce crops and believed life rose from the wet darkness. Or perhaps because the earliest cities were built in landscapes where water was never fully controlled, never fully known, always capable of returning to claim what humans had made. In Sumer, that fear and wonder took divine form. The Abzu belonged to Enki, and Enki was dangerous, not because he was cruel, but because he knew too much. In myth, he is often the god who understands hidden systems, the structure of the cosmos, the rules of ritual, the secret powers called me, the divine decrees or cultural powers that organize civilization. Writing, kingship, craft, music, sexuality, priesthood, law, and social order were not merely human inventions in these stories. They were sacred powers that could be given, guarded, stolen, or transferred. What if civilization itself was imagined as something brought up from the deep? This does not mean Sumerian scribes believed humans found libraries under the ocean. Ancient myth speaks in symbols, divine dramas, and ritual images. Yet symbols can preserve truths that plain history cannot. They tell us how people felt about their world. They show what they feared losing. They reveal where a culture placed the source of knowledge, and Sumer placed much of that source in the hidden water. One of the most important cities in this mystery is Eridu. In Sumerian tradition, Eridu was among the oldest cities and strongly associated with Enki. Archaeology confirms that Eridu was an ancient site in southern Mesopotamia, with a long sequence of temples built and rebuilt over generations. The people who worshipped there did not see the temple as a simple building. It was a cosmic meeting point. It connected heaven, earth, and the sacred deep. The temple of Enki was known as the Abzu, often understood as the house of the Abzu. Consider that phrase carefully. A house of the deep, a dwelling of hidden waters, a temple on land named after a realm below water. Why would a sacred building in a mud-brick city carry the name of an unseen abyss? To ancient worshippers, the answer may have seemed obvious. The temple was not merely located in the city. It anchored the city to the divine source beneath reality. Through rituals, offerings, hymns, and sacred architecture, the visible world touched the invisible one. The priest did not need to dive into an ocean trench to reach the deep. The deep was ritually present. It rose through sacred water, sacred speech, and sacred space. But modern minds hear something else in the phrase, House of the Abzu. We hear echoes of a submerged chamber, a hidden kingdom, a world below the waters. And that is where caution and curiosity must walk together. Archaeologists do not recognize the Abzu as evidence for an actual underwater empire. There is no excavated palace beneath the sea labeled as Enki's kingdom. There is no recovered tablet saying a human kingdom once stood on the ocean floor. Yet the Persian Gulf region has changed across deep time. Coastlines moved, sea levels rose after the Ice Age. Ancient human communities may have lived in places now underwater long before writing. This is not fantasy. Landscapes have vanished beneath rising seas in many parts of the world. But connecting those submerged landscapes directly to Sumerian myth is a modern hypothesis, not established fact. Still, the possibility creates a powerful question. Could memories of lost wetlands, drowned settlements, or ancestral homelands have shaped later sacred stories? Or did the Abzu arise entirely from religious imagination and the everyday experience of groundwater, rivers, canals, marshes, and flood? The ancient texts do not answer directly. They speak in myth. They show Enki in his watery domain. They show divine beings moving between hidden realms and human cities. They show knowledge emerging from places ordinary people cannot enter. They show water as a border, not only between land and sea, but between ignorance and wisdom. That border is essential. A lost kingdom beneath the ocean fascinates us because it reverses the normal direction of discovery. We expect truth to come from above stars, gods, heavens, revelation descending like light. But the Sumerian deep suggests another possibility. Truth may rise from below. It may come from darkness, from buried tablets, from ruins under mud, from flooded plains, from the unconscious depths of human memory. Is that why these stories still feel alive? When we stare into deep water, we confront something older than language. The surface reflects us, but beneath it, everything disappears. Ancient Mesopotamians lived with that mystery every day. The river that fed the field could also carry away a child. The canal that sustained the city could fill with silt. The marsh that gave fish and reeds could hide enemies, spirits, and unknown paths. Water was the nearest thing to creation and destruction at once. So when scribes carved signs into clay about the Abzu, they were not writing about a decorative mythic background. They were recording a world view in which civilization floated above mystery. The clay tablet itself deepens the symbolism. Clay comes from wet earth. It is shaped by hand, marked with a reed, dried into memory. The Sumerian scribe literally turned river mud into writing. Knowledge was born from the same mixture of earth and water that sustained the fields. Every tablet was a small artificial world, pulled from the deep mud and made permanent. What if the very act of writing was a kind of rescue from the waters? Across the centuries, Mesopotamian traditions would change. Sumerian stories would be copied, adapted, translated, and transformed by Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian scribes. Enki would become Ea in later texts. The Abzu would remain a charged term, appearing in myths, rituals, temple names, and cosmological language. Sometimes it was a divine dwelling. Sometimes it was a cosmic reservoir. Sometimes it was connected with purification and wisdom. It was never just an ocean, in the modern geographic sense, and yet the image remains irresistible, a hidden realm under the waters, guarded by a god of secret knowledge. Modern speculation often rushes too quickly into certainty. It claims the Abzu was Atlantis. It claims Enki was an alien being. It claims the Sumerians recorded a literal underwater civilization with advanced technology. These claims may attract attention, but they go far beyond what the ancient texts and archaeology can securely support. The more responsible mystery is subtler and, in many ways, more haunting. Why did the earliest cities imagine their deepest wisdom as hidden beneath them? Perhaps the lost kingdom is not a city waiting for sonar scans. Perhaps it is the vanished mental world of the first urban civilizations, a world where water, divinity, memory, and power were inseparable. To enter the Abzu is to enter the ancient fear that everything humans build rests on something unseen. Beneath the temple is water. Beneath the king is divine decree. Beneath the city is chaos. Beneath memory is forgetting. And beneath the myth, perhaps, is an old human experience no excavation can fully recover. The Sumerians did not give us a simple map. They gave us fragments, hymns, myths, temple names, divine titles, broken tablets, ritual echoes. Each fragment is like a shard lifted from dark water. It reflects something, but never the whole shape. The Abzu appears, disappears, and returns, always present, but never fully explained. That is what makes it powerful. A fabricated mystery dies when evidence fails. A symbolic mystery grows because every answer opens another door. The Abzu is not proof of a hidden ocean kingdom in the modern sense, but it is proof that ancient Mesopotamians imagined a sacred depth beneath the world, a depth linked to wisdom, creation, ritual power, and the gods who shaped civilization. And if the first doorway into this mystery is the Abzu, then the next question becomes even more strange. Why did Sumerian tradition place the beginning of kingship at a city tied so closely to the waters of Enki? Why would the first kingship in human memory begin in a city that seems to stand at the edge of water, myth, and disappearance? In the ancient Sumerian imagination, kingship was not introduced as a political invention. It did not slowly rise from village councils, military alliances, temple management, or irrigation disputes. Even if historians know those human processes matter deeply, in the sacred language of the Sumerian king list, kingship came down from heaven. It descended. It arrived as something weighty, radiant, and dangerous, and the first city chosen to receive it was Eridu. That single detail changes the entire mystery. Eridu was not the largest empire, it was not the loudest battlefield, it was not remembered because its armies conquered half the world. Its power was older, quieter, and more difficult to define. It was a city of origins, a place where the beginning itself seemed to gather. In Sumerian tradition, Eridu was associated with Enki, wisdom, fresh water, ritual purity, and the sacred deep. So when kingship descends to Eridu, the text does more than name an ancient city. It places political order at the threshold of divine water. Why would authority begin there? Picture the landscape. Southern Mesopotamia was not a land of clean borders. It was a region of shifting channels, reed beds, salt flats, marshes, lagoons, and low horizons. Land could feel temporary. Water moved and returned. A settlement might depend on canals that had to be cleaned, guarded, repaired, and ritually protected. The city was not separate from water. It survived through water and feared water at the same time. Eridu emerged in this world like a sacred island of order. Archaeologists know Eridu as one of the earliest important urban and religious sites in southern Mesopotamia. Excavations revealed a long sequence of temples built upon earlier temples, layer after layer. As if generations refused to abandon the holy center, mud brick walls rose, collapsed, were covered, and rose again. The shrine became older by becoming taller. Each rebuilding did not erase the past. It buried the past inside the sacred mound. There is something haunting in that image. A city grows upward by burying its own memory. Every new temple stands upon an older one. Every act of worship rests on forgotten foundations. Every priest entering the sanctuary walks above vanished rooms, sealed floors, and offerings no living person has seen. Eridu was not only a city in space, it was a city in depth. Could that be why it became a place of beginnings? The Sumerian king list is not a modern historical document. It is a crafted tradition, a political and theological text that arranges kings, cities, and reigns into a meaningful sequence. Some rulers in it are historically known. Others belong to legendary time. Some reign lengths are impossibly vast. Historians treat the list carefully, not as simple chronology, but as evidence for how Mesopotamian scribes imagined authority, legitimacy, and sacred order. In that list, kingship does not belong naturally to all people. It moves from city to city. Eridu receives it. Then it passes onward. Later, other cities hold it. This creates a strange image of kingship as a divine force that can be transferred, almost like a sacred object. A city does not merely have power. It is chosen to carry power for a time. But the first bearer is Eridu. The ancient account gives Eridu a place that feels less like politics and more like cosmic staging. The earliest kings named there are Alulim and Alalgar, figures whose reigns stretch across tens of thousands of years in the tradition. No archaeologist reads those numbers as ordinary administrative records. They belong to mythic scale. They suggest an age outside normal human measurement, a time when memory has become ceremonial, when kingship is imagined as older than any living lineage. Why give the first kings such impossible reigns? One possibility is that enormous numbers created sacred distance. They told the audience that this was not the recent past, this was the deep past, a time so remote that ordinary history could not contain it. Another possibility is that the numbers served symbolic purposes related to scribal mathematics and royal ideology. Modern scholars debate details, but the effect is clear. The list does not want Eridu to feel merely old. It wants Eridu to feel primordial. And primordial places are never simple. In myth, origins are powerful because they explain why the world is arranged as it is. A first city is not just a first city. It becomes a pattern. It teaches later cities what civilization is supposed to mean. If Eridu is first, and Eridu is tied to sacred water, wisdom, and Enki, then civilization begins not through violence, but through divine knowledge. Kingship is not born in a battlefield. It is received near the deep. That is a remarkable claim. Modern history gives another view. Early cities developed through agriculture, labor organization, trade, temples, craft specialization, and environmental pressure. Southern Mesopotamia demanded cooperation. Fields needed irrigation. Irrigation needed planning. Planning needed authority. Temples accumulated wealth, labor, and symbolic power. Administrators counted grain, animals, beer, and workers, clay tokens, seals, and eventually, writing helped manage increasingly complex life. From this perspective, kingship grows from the needs of society. But the Sumerian sacred account speaks from another level of meaning. It does not ask how institutions slowly formed. It asks why authority should be obeyed at all. It answers by saying that kingship descended from heaven. Human rule becomes legitimate because it participates in cosmic order. Still, Eridu complicates that answer. If kingship descended from heaven, why land first in the city of Enki, the god of the watery deep? Why not at a mountain, where heaven feels closer? Why not at a storm, God's shrine, where thunder displays power? Why not at a war city, where kingship could be shown as conquest? The tradition places the beginning in a watery, southern, ancient cult center. That choice makes kingship feel less like domination and more like initiation. It is as though power must first pass through wisdom. A scene forms in the mind, a low city near marsh and open horizon, temple walls glowing in the heat, priests moving through courtyards, offerings prepared, canals glimmering beyond the settlement. The king does not stand alone. He is watched by gods, measured by ritual, and connected to forces older than human ambition. Eridu's message is not that a ruler owns the world. It is that the world has an order, and a ruler must stand inside it. But what happens when a city that claims the beginning eventually fades? Eridu did not remain the permanent center of Mesopotamian power. Other cities rose with greater political and economic influence. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Nippur, Kish. History moved, population shifted, rivers changed, trade networks expanded. Political authority gathered elsewhere, yet Eridu kept its aura of sacred antiquity. It remained remembered as a place where something began. There is a deep human pattern here. Some places lose power but gain mystery. When the living city weakens, the remembered city grows larger. Ruins become more than ruins. They become proof that a hidden age existed. A broken wall becomes a question. A buried temple becomes a doorway. The less a place explains itself, the more imagination gathers around it. Eridu became one of those places. The archaeology of Eridu does not reveal a palace under the ocean. It reveals a long-lived religious center, ancient settlement layers, and a temple tradition tied to Enki. Yet because the environment of southern Mesopotamia was so watery and unstable, and because ancient sea levels and shorelines changed across millennia, Eridu also invites a larger reflection. The first city of kingship may have stood in a landscape very different from the one a visitor sees today. Ancient geography is not fixed. Coastlines in the Persian Gulf region shifted across deep time. River sediments built land outward. Marshes expanded and retreated. The boundary between freshwater, saltwater, settlement, and wilderness was never permanent. A city remembered as ancient and sacred may have been connected in cultural memory to waterways, lagoons, and routes now altered beyond recognition. This does not prove a drowned kingdom beneath a modern ocean, but it reminds us that the world of the Sumerians was built on moving ground. What if the lost kingdom is partly a memory of unstable land? Not a single glittering empire beneath the sea, but an entire ancient relationship with water that modern maps struggle to show. A kingdom hidden not because someone concealed it, but because rivers shifted, marshes swallowed paths, mud covered foundations, and later civilizations inherited names whose landscapes had already changed. Eridu may be visible as a ruin, yet the world that made Eridu sacred is gone. That vanished world matters. To understand Eridu only as an archaeological site is to miss its symbolic force. To understand it only as myth is to ignore the mud-brick reality beneath the story. The power lies in the tension between the two. Archaeology gives walls, levels, pottery, platforms, and plans. Myth gives descent, kingship, gods, vast reigns, and sacred water. Neither cancels the other. Together, they create the strange image of a city that stands between evidence and imagination. In the king list, Eridu is not introduced with hesitation. Kingship descends, and the city receives it. This is a statement of cosmic drama. Yet the line is so brief that it feels almost like a sealed door. There is no detailed explanation of the ceremony, no description of the first crown, no speech from Enki, no scene of priests watching heaven open above the temple. The text gives the beginning, then moves on. Why so little detail about the most important moment? Perhaps the scribes assumed everyone knew the sacred importance of Eridu. Perhaps the story had already been told in hymns, rituals, and oral traditions now lost. Perhaps the power of the line came from its silence. A mystery is sometimes strongest when it refuses to explain itself. Imagine a tablet damaged at the edge, held in a museum drawer under soft light. Its signs are small, disciplined, and ancient. One line says kingship was lowered from heaven. Another names Eridu. For the scribe, this may have been theology, memory, politics, and identity all at once. For the modern viewer, it feels like a fragment of a much larger map. A map not drawn with coastlines, but with sacred authority. Eridu's kings ruled for impossible lengths of time. Its god belonged to hidden waters. Its temple carried the name of the deep. Its archaeological mound preserved layers of worship. Its memory survived long after power moved elsewhere. Each detail points in a different direction, yet all of them circle the same question: why did Mesopotamian tradition place the first city of kingship at the meeting point of land, water, and divine wisdom? The answer may not be one thing. It may be a layered inheritance, part ecology, part theology, part royal ideology, part memory of ancient settlement, part reverence for a cult center whose foundations reached into a past already mysterious to the Sumerians themselves. And then there is the most unsettling possibility of all. Maybe Eridu was not remembered as first because it was politically first in any simple modern sense. Maybe it was remembered as first because it represented the idea that civilization begins only when chaos is given a house, when water is given a boundary, when divine knowledge is given a city, and when human power is placed under a sacred order. If so, the first kingdom was never only a kingdom of walls and rulers. It was a ritual claim that humanity could live on the edge of the deep without being swallowed by it. But if kingship began in Eridu, why did the sacred tradition insist that this gift could move from one city to another? As though power itself was searching for something, why would a god need a house inside the deep? Not a palace on a mountain, not a throne set among thunderclouds, not a golden hall raised high above human sight. In the religious imagination of ancient Sumer, one of the greatest gods was connected to a sanctuary whose very name pointed downward, inward, and beneath the surface of the visible world. Enki, Lord of wisdom, fresh water, magic, craft, and hidden knowledge, was worshipped in a temple remembered as the Iabzu. The name carries an atmosphere that is difficult to escape. The house of the Abzu, the dwelling of the deep, a sacred structure built on land, yet named as if it belonged to the waters below creation. What kind of house was this? The ancient texts describe temples as more than places of prayer. They were living centers of divine presence. A temple was not simply where people gathered to honor a god. It was the god's residence within the human city. Offerings fed the divine household. Rituals maintained cosmic balance. Priests served, cleaned, sang, poured, prepared, and guarded the sacred order. The temple was a machine of meaning, a point where the human and divine worlds touched. In that world, Enki's house was unlike the home of a distant sky ruler. It suggested hidden access. It implied depth. It turned the temple into something stranger than a public shrine. It became the visible doorway of an invisible realm. Imagine approaching it at dawn in ancient Eridu. The air is still. The flat land glows pale under the first light. Mud brick walls rise from the sacred mound. Reeds whisper in the distance. Canals carry water toward fields and courtyards. A priest steps through a gate, not as a tourist entering a ruin, but as a servant entering the ordered body of a god. Somewhere inside, ritual water is prepared. Vessels are washed. Offerings are arranged. Sacred speech begins to awaken the building. To a modern viewer, a temple may look like architecture. To a Sumerian worshipper, it could become geography, theology, and cosmic memory at once. The Iabzu was not an ocean chamber in a literal modern sense. Archaeologists do not find proof that priests descended through tunnels into an underwater kingdom. What archaeology reveals at Eridu is a long religious tradition, with temple levels built across generations. What historians see is a cult center connected with Enki and sacred water symbolism. What the ancient tradition presents is a divine house joined to the deep foundation of the world. What modern interpretations sometimes propose is that this imagery may preserve memories of an environment where water shaped every aspect of existence. But the temple itself forces a deeper question. Why build a house for water that cannot be fully seen? In Mesopotamian life, water was practical. It irrigated fields, moved boats, sustained animals, and allowed cities to survive. Yet water was also ritual. It purified the body. It prepared sacred objects. It washed away pollution. It transformed ordinary space into holy space. The same element that moved through canals could also represent the oldest powers of creation. In this way, every ritual basin could become a miniature cosmos. Every poured libation could echo the hidden reservoir beneath the earth. The Iabzu concentrated that idea into a single place. A temple name mattered. It was not decorative. Mesopotamian temples carried names that expressed divine identity, cosmic function, or sacred power. A temple name could reveal how worshippers understood the god who lived there. If Enki's house was named for the Abzu, then the sanctuary did not merely belong to him. It manifested something about him. He was the god whose wisdom flowed from the unseen depth. This is not the same kind of power carried by a warrior god. Enki's authority was fluid. He solved problems through cunning. He shaped life through craft. He understood secret formulas. He was linked with incantations, purification, and the ordering of culture. In myths, he often appears when the world is in danger of becoming too rigid, too violent, or too doomed. He finds loopholes. He sends warnings. He opens hidden paths. Could the house of the Abzu represent the mind of such a god? A sanctuary like this would not need to display power through height alone. It could reveal power through containment. The hidden deep had to be housed, focused, and approached through ritual discipline. The mystery was not that water existed. Everyone saw water. The mystery was that water concealed an unseen order, and only the right god, the right priest, the right words, and the right place could make that order available. There is a psychological force in that idea. Human beings often imagine wisdom as something buried. Secrets lie beneath surfaces. Memories sink. Truth must be drawn up. Even today, people speak of deep knowledge, deep time, deep consciousness, and deep history. The Sumerian sacred world gave that metaphor a divine location. The Abzu was not merely wet, it was profound. But how would ordinary people have experienced such a temple? Not by reading theology as modern readers do. Most people did not study myths from books. They lived around rituals, festivals, offerings, songs, processions, and sacred labor. They saw priests move in and out of restricted spaces. They heard hymns that praised the god's house. They watched the temple economy shape daily life. Grain, animals, textiles, beer, oils, reeds, and labor flowed toward and from the sacred center. The temple was both religious and material, both invisible and deeply practical. This dual nature is essential. The Iabzu could symbolize the watery deep while also functioning as an earthly institution. It could be a divine residence and an economic center. It could embody cosmic mystery while requiring bricks, workers, storage rooms, vessels, and maintenance. Ancient religion did not separate the sacred from administration. in the way modern people often do. The god's house needed supplies because the god's presence was treated as real within the life of the city. So the hidden kingdom beneath the waters was not only imagined in myth, it shaped behavior above ground. Offerings were brought. Ritual purity mattered. Sacred boundaries were guarded. The city oriented itself around divine presence. The temple turned cosmic ideas into schedules, duties, and architecture. A mythic deep became a social reality. That is one reason ancient texts are so powerful. Even when they speak symbolically, their symbols organize actual lives. The house of the Abzu may have stood as a sacred translation of the unseen into brick. This image becomes even more striking when considering how fragile mud brick architecture was. Temples in southern Mesopotamia were not carved from eternal mountain stone. They were built from earth and water, shaped into bricks, dried under the sun, and renewed across generations. Rain, flood, salt, erosion, and time damaged them. To preserve a temple, people rebuilt it. Sacred continuity required physical repetition. A house of the deep had to be constantly remade from mud. That is almost poetic. The temple of the water god rises from wet earth. Its walls are born from the same elemental mixture that farmers, potters, scribes, and builders depended on. The building itself becomes a statement. Civilization is clay disciplined by ritual. Without shape, mud is just mud. With human hands and divine permission, it becomes a sanctuary. Why does this matter? For the mystery of a hidden kingdom. Because the Sumerians may not have imagined sacred places only as locations, they imagined them as relationships. A temple was not merely where a god was found. It was how humans entered a relationship with that god's domain. The Iabzu did not need to sit physically at the bottom of the sea to be the house of the Abzu. It functioned as the earthly contact point with that hidden depth. It made the inaccessible accessible, but only through sacred order. The deepest ocean, in this sense, may not be measured by distance. It may be measured by separation. A fisherman can cross water in a boat. A diver can enter a river. But no ordinary person can step into the divine source of wisdom without transformation. That is the boundary the temple controls. It tells humans you may approach, but not casually. You may receive blessing, but not steal the secret. You may stand near the deep, but you do not own it. This idea appears again and again in ancient sacred traditions. Temples often mark thresholds. In Egypt, sanctuaries represented the moment of creation renewed daily. In later Babylonian religion, temple rituals maintained cosmic order against chaos. In Hebrew tradition, sacred space included restricted zones where only certain priests could enter at certain times. These are not identical systems, and they should not be collapsed into one story. Yet they share a documented pattern. Sacred architecture can turn invisible reality into a controlled physical path. The Iabzu belongs to that pattern, but with a Sumerian accent of water and wisdom. Now imagine the inside of such a sacred world, not as fantasy marble halls beneath waves, but as a dim chamber of incense, polished vessels, carefully spoken names, and guarded objects. A place where silence carries force. A place where water is not casual, but charged. A place where the unseen presence of Enki is not described with scientific certainty, but experienced through ritual concentration. What if the hidden kingdom was not meant to be entered by ships, but by rites? Modern interpretations often want physical ruins. They search for submerged walls, lost islands, drowned palaces, or sonar anomalies. That desire is understandable. Physical discovery feels final. It gives the mystery a shape. But Sumerian religion often works differently. It turns landscape into symbol and symbol into practice. The divine realm is not less real to worshippers because it is ritual. It is made real through ritual. The Iabzu stands at the center of this tension. If someone asks whether Enki's house proves a literal kingdom beneath the ocean, the honest answer is no. The evidence does not support that certainty. But if someone asks whether ancient Sumer preserved the image of a divine domain beneath the waters, connected to wisdom, creation, purification, and civilization, the answer is yes. That image is deeply rooted in Mesopotamian religious thought, and perhaps that is more mysterious than a simple lost city. A lost city could be found, photographed, mapped, dated, and placed in a museum exhibit. A sacred deep cannot be solved so easily. It survives as an idea that shaped temples, myths, rituals, royal memory, and the imagination of later civilizations. It whispers that the visible world is only the upper surface of a greater order. It suggests that wisdom does not always descend like sunlight. Sometimes it rises like groundwater through the dark. The House of the Abzu is therefore a paradox. It is a building and a threshold, a human construction and a divine address, a mud-brick temple and a cosmic ocean, a place where ancient people may have felt that the deepest waters of existence had entered the city and accepted a dwelling among them. But a god of hidden wisdom rarely keeps knowledge sealed forever. If Enki's house marked the doorway to the deep, what kind of land would his waters point toward beyond the horizon? What if the hidden kingdom was not beneath the water, but beyond it? The ancient Sumerians preserved the memory of a place called Dilmun, a land that seems to shimmer at the edge of geography and myth. It is not described like an ordinary city. It does not enter the imagination as a place of crowded markets, noisy streets, royal battles, or brick walls under the sun. In the mythic language of Sumer, Dilmun appears as something cleaner, stranger, and more distant. A pure land, a bright land, a place touched by divine presence. But where was it? That question has followed the name for generations. In ancient texts, Dilmun can sound like a paradise. In economic records, it appears as a real place connected to trade. In later historical interpretation, it is often associated with the island of Bahrain and nearby Gulf regions. Archaeology has found evidence that Bahrain was an important ancient trade center, especially in the Bronze Age. But the mythic Dilmun of Sumerian poetry is not identical to the archaeological island on a map. One is a sacred image. The other is a historical location. They overlap, but they are not the same thing, and that overlap is where the mystery becomes powerful. In the Sumerian myth often called Enki and Ninhursag, Dilmun is introduced as a place unlike the world humans know. It is pure, it is clean, it is bright. Certain forms of suffering are absent. The land has the atmosphere of a beginning that has not yet been damaged. It is not a kingdom of death. It is not a dark underworld. It is not a battlefield of gods. It feels like a place before decay fully enters creation. Why would a civilization surrounded by mud, flood, heat, disease, labor, and political conflict? Imagine such a land across the waters. The ancient account does not give us a modern travel guide. It speaks in sacred images. Dilmun is connected with Enki, Ninhursag, fertility, divine union, water, illness, healing, and the ordering of life. At one point, the land requires fresh water. Enki brings water into it, and the barren or incomplete place becomes fertile. That image is crucial. Dilmun is not paradise because it is already finished. It becomes complete when divine water reaches it. This is a different kind of hidden kingdom. It is not hidden by darkness. It is hidden by distance. It is not buried under the sea. It lies across the sea, wrapped in sacred memory. To reach it, the imagination must cross water. To understand it, the listener must move between myth and geography, between paradise and trade, between divine fertility and real Gulf routes. Picture an ancient boat moving south through the Gulf. It is not a grand ocean vessel in the modern sense. It is a craft of reed, wood, bitumen, rope, and skill, moving through dangerous waters under a merciless sky. The sailors carry goods, stories, anxieties, and prayers. Behind them are the river cities of Mesopotamia. Ahead is an island world of trade, copper roots, dates, pearls, seals, and foreign speech. The horizon is low and shining. Land appears slowly, like a secret rising from the sea. For a trader, Dilmun may have been a port. For a poet, it could become the edge of creation. This double identity matters. Ancient places often lived two lives. One life was practical. Ships arrived. Goods were exchanged. Administrators recorded deliveries. Merchants negotiated. Seals marked ownership. The other life was symbolic. The far land became pure because it was distant. It became sacred because it was associated with rare goods, strange customs, and the mystery of what lies beyond the known world. Distance gives geography a spiritual charge. What historians generally believe is that Dilmun was an important partner in long-distance trade between Mesopotamia, the Gulf, Oman, and the Indus region. Goods, materials, and ideas move through these networks. What archaeologists can study are settlements, graves, seals, ceramics, weights, and trade traces. What ancient texts describe is not only commerce, but a place made radiant by divine imagination. What modern speculation sometimes suggests is that Dilmun might preserve a memory of lost homelands, submerged Gulf landscapes, or a forgotten sacred geography older than written Sumerian tradition. That last idea remains interpretation, not established fact. Yet it is not meaningless. The Persian Gulf was not always the same shape. Across deep time, changing sea levels altered the region. Ancient shorelines shifted. Habitable landscapes may have existed in places now underwater. Such environmental changes do not prove that Dilmun was a drowned paradise. They do show that the ancient Gulf was a world where land, water, memory, and migration could become deeply entangled. Could sacred geography preserve emotional memory, even when exact geography disappears? Ancient people did not separate place from story the way modern maps do. A place was not merely latitude and longitude. It was ancestry, trade, danger, divine presence, ritual reputation, and mythic meaning. Dilmun could be a real place, and more than a real place. It could be both island and symbol, harbor and paradise, trading partner and sacred horizon. That is why it should not be flattened into one answer. If we say Dilmun was only Bahrain, we risk losing the mythic force that made the name sacred. If we say Dilmun was only a mythical paradise, we ignore the economic and historical records that connect it to real exchange networks. If we say it was proof of a lost underwater empire, we go beyond the evidence. The most honest answer is more mysterious. Dilmun existed in the Sumerian mind at the crossing point between remembered geography and sacred imagination. And crossings are dangerous. In myths, to cross water often means to leave the ordinary world. Water divides the known from the unknown. It separates the living from the dead, the human from the divine, the familiar from the strange. In the case of Dilmun, water does not lead downward into darkness, but outward toward a radiant elsewhere. The deep is not always below. Sometimes the deep begins at the horizon. There is a quiet psychological truth here. Human beings often place perfection somewhere else. A lost garden, a holy island, a mountain beyond the clouds, a city beneath the sea, a golden age before corruption. Dilmun belongs to this ancient pattern, but it is not an empty fantasy. It is anchored in the specific world of Mesopotamia, where boats carried real goods through real waters, and where the unknown south could become the screen upon which divine stories were projected. The mythic land's purity is especially haunting because it is not permanent. The story does not leave Dilmun untouched and silent. Divine action enters it. Desire enters it. Plants grow. Boundaries are crossed. Illness appears. Healing must occur. Even paradise becomes complicated once life begins moving inside it. Why would a pure land need healing? That question transforms the meaning of Dilmun. It is not simply a place without death or suffering. It is a place where the forces that create life also create risk. Enki's power brings fertility, but divine desire and divine transgression produce consequences. Ninhursag, the great mother figure, becomes central to healing and restoration. The myth circles around generation, damage, naming, and repair. Creation is not a perfect machine. It is fragile, bodily, and dangerous. This is a very Sumerian kind of wisdom. The ancient scribes did not always imagine beginnings as calm and complete. Beginnings could be messy. Gods could desire, argue, deceive, curse, heal, and restore. Sacred lands could be bright and still require water. Divine actions could bless and wound at the same time. Myth did not remove ambiguity from the world. It gave ambiguity sacred form. Dilmun therefore becomes more than a distant kingdom. It becomes a question about the cost of life. A land without sickness sounds like paradise, but a world without change may also be incomplete. Fertility requires water. Birth requires bodies. Bodies can suffer. Plants can heal. But plants can also mark forbidden knowledge. Names create identity, but names also reveal wounds. The Pure Land becomes a theater where creation learns that life and vulnerability cannot be separated. This is why Dilmun is so different from a simple lost civilization legend. A lost civilization story usually asks, where did it go? Dillman asks something deeper. What happens when perfection becomes alive? The visual world of this question is unforgettable. A distant island under white light, shorelines washed by warm Gulf waters, date palms standing against the sky, boats approaching with cargo, temples in Mesopotamia receiving goods from afar, a scribe pressing the name Dillman into clay, not knowing that thousands of years later, people would still wonder whether he meant a port, a paradise, or a memory older than both. The name itself becomes a vessel. Inside it are merchants and myths, copper and purity, gulf winds and divine water, real roots and sacred longing. The more one tries to define Dillman, the more it divides into layers. It refuses to become only one thing. Perhaps that refusal is the clue. The lost kingdom, hidden beneath the deepest ocean, may not be a single location waiting to be found. It may be an ancient way of seeing places touched by water as thresholds. Some thresholds go downward into the hidden deep. Some lead outward across the sea. Some appear in temples. Some appear in stories of paradise. Sumerian tradition keeps returning to these watery borders because water was where certainty ended, and beyond certainty, the gods could still speak. Dillman stands at the edge of the known world, but also at the edge of human longing. It preserves the dream of a place untouched by ordinary pain, then quietly reveals that even divine landscapes can fracture. It offers a paradise, then fills it with consequence. It points toward geography, then dissolves into theology. It can be studied through archaeology, but never fully captured by excavation. That is why Dillman remains one of the most mysterious names in the Sumerian world. Not because it proves a drowned empire, not because it gives us a secret map to the ocean floor, but because it shows that the ancient imagination placed sacred possibility across the waters, in a land both real and unreal, remembered and transformed, desired and unreachable. And if the Pure Land across the sea could be touched by divine water, why did Sumerian memory also preserve stories of a world destroyed when the waters rose too high? What kind of world must exist for the gods to decide that water should erase it? In the oldest Mesopotamian flood traditions, the deluge is not only a disaster, it is a rupture in reality. It divides human memory into two unequal territories the world people can inherit, and the world that vanished behind the waters. The story does not begin with ocean ruins or glittering cities below the waves. It begins with a terrifying idea. Civilization can be built, blessed, organized, and remembered, yet still be judged fragile enough to disappear in a single cosmic flood. That is what makes the Sumerian flood tradition so haunting. The ancient texts describe a time when cities existed, kings ruled, gods made decisions, and human life had already taken shape. Then the divine council determines that a flood will come. The waters rise, the old world is overwhelmed, and only a chosen survivor carries memory across the catastrophe. In Sumerian tradition, that figure is often known as Ziusudra. In later Akkadian and Babylonian tradition, similar roles are carried by Atrahasis and Utnapishtim. These are not identical stories, but they belong to a shared Mesopotamian world of flood memory, divine secrecy, human vulnerability, and survival through warning. Why did this story matter so deeply? Imagine a city at night, under a sky without electric light. The canals are quiet. Reeds bend in the dark. Families sleep on rooftops or in rooms of mud brick. Temple lamps fade one by one. Somewhere beyond the settlement, the river is rising. At first, it is only a sound. Then it becomes movement. Then it becomes terror. Walls soften. Fields vanish. Animals break loose. Clay tablets dissolve if they are not protected. Storehouses collapse. Names, debts, songs, and lineages can be lost with the same indifference as baskets and tools. For the people of Mesopotamia, flood was not an abstract symbol. It was a lived danger. Archaeologists know that river floods affected ancient settlements in southern Mesopotamia. Excavations at different sites have found flood deposits. Although these do not point to one single global flood covering the entire Earth, historians usually understand Mesopotamian flood myths as sacred narratives shaped by real environmental experience, theological reflection, and literary tradition. The ancient accounts speak of a world-destroying deluge sent by divine decision. Modern interpretation asks how local floods, cultural memory, political ideology, and human fear became transformed into cosmic story. The gap between those levels must be kept clear. The Sumerian flood story is not a newspaper report. It is not a geological survey. It is a mythic account that uses divine drama to express the terror of total loss. Yet myths can preserve something that ordinary records cannot: the emotional truth of catastrophe. A flood does not need to cover the entire planet to feel like the end of the world to those who endure it. When the city is gone, when the fields are gone, when the dead cannot be counted, when the old order is broken, the world has ended locally, socially, spiritually. What if the deluge story preserves the memory of that feeling? The fragmentary text, often called the Sumerian flood story or Eridu Genesis, gives us a broken window into this ancient imagination. Much of it is damaged. That damage itself becomes part of the mystery. We do not possess a perfect, complete script with every scene intact. Instead, we hear the flood tradition through gaps, missing lines, surviving phrases, later parallels, and scholarly reconstruction. The story reaches us like a voice carried through storm water, clear in some moments, lost in others. This brokenness is appropriate. A flood story arrives in fragments. In the Sumerian version, Ziusudra appears as a king or pious figure who receives a divine warning. The gods have resolved to send a flood, but one god allows the secret to reach the human survivor. In later traditions, Ea or Enki plays this role through clever speech, warning the chosen man without openly violating divine counsel. The warning leads to the building of a boat. The flood comes. Humanity is nearly destroyed. The survivor is preserved. Afterward, he receives extraordinary honor, sometimes even a form of life beyond ordinary human fate. The details shift across traditions, but the structure burns itself into memory. A decision is hidden in heaven. A warning slips through. A vessel is built. The waters rise. The world disappears. A survivor emerges carrying the seed of continuity. Why does divine secrecy appear at the center of the story? The flood is not simply rain. It is planned catastrophe. The gods know. Humans do not. The chosen survivor lives because knowledge reaches him in time. This makes the story not only about water, but about information. Survival depends on receiving a message hidden from the masses. The catastrophe is physical, but the rescue begins with a secret. That theme gives the flood tradition a sharp psychological edge. The most frightening disasters are not only those that kill, but those that arrive while ordinary life continues. People marry, trade, eat, argue, build, sleep, and plan, not knowing that a decision has already been made beyond their sight. The flood myth captures that dread. Somewhere, the future has changed, but the city has not yet heard. Could the lost kingdom beneath the waters be less about buildings and more about interrupted lives? Think of what water does to civilization. Fire leaves charred remains. War leaves weapons, walls, and mass graves. Sand buries and preserves. But water transforms. It softens clay, moves bodies, scatters objects, erases boundaries, and carries fragments far from their origins. In a culture that wrote on clay, water was both sacred and threatening. The tablet needed moisture to be shaped, but too much water could destroy the signs. Memory itself had to survive the element that gave it birth. That paradox sits at the heart of Mesopotamian flood imagination. A city depends on the river. A city fears the river. A field needs irrigation. A field dies under uncontrolled water. A temple uses purification. A temple can collapse in flood. Life and destruction come through the same gate. This is not only practical, it becomes theological. If water can give and take away, then water belongs to powers greater than humans. A flood becomes not random overflow, but divine speech. The gods are not merely angry in a human sense. They are forces through which the boundaries of creation can be redrawn. Later, Mesopotamian versions add another disturbing layer. In the Atrahasis tradition, human noise or overpopulation contributes to divine irritation. The gods become troubled by the very creatures whose labor supports the world. Catastrophe becomes a solution to a divine problem. This is not a comforting theology. It suggests that humans are necessary, yet also excessive. Created to serve, they multiply beyond control. Their existence becomes both useful and unbearable. What kind of universe imagines humanity that way? The flood story does not flatter us. It tells us that civilization is not guaranteed. It shows that gods may protect order, but also dismantle it. It places humanity in a vulnerable middle state, clever enough to build cities, dependent enough to be destroyed by weather, and fortunate enough to survive only when a hidden warning is given. In visual terms, the flood is one of the most powerful scenes in ancient literature. The horizon darkens, winds tear across the land, waters strike walls, the boat rises, the city disappears beneath a moving surface. Voices are lost, sacred spaces are submerged, the known world becomes a blank of water. Then, silence. What remains when the water calms? Not victory, not certainty. A survivor, a vessel, a memory, a question. This is where the flood myth differs from simple disaster storytelling. The point is not merely that people died. The point is that the flood creates a new age. The survivor does not only escape death, he becomes a bridge between vanished order and renewed humanity. He carries knowledge from the drowned world into the surviving world. His memory becomes the fragile thread that prevents total forgetting. That role is sacred and terrible. To survive a world-ending flood is to become the keeper of what no one else can verify. Who can contradict the last witness? Who can fully understand what he saw? The survivor becomes both blessed and isolated. He knows that beneath ordinary life lies an earlier world removed by water. Every city rebuilt after such a story stands on the haunted awareness that another city may lie under mud, silt, riverbed, or sea. Modern readers often ask whether the flood really happened. That question matters, but it is not the only question. A better question may be, why did Mesopotamian civilization make the flood central to its understanding of time? The answer may lie in the way the flood reorganizes history. It creates a sacred boundary. There is the age of ancient kings, divine closeness, impossible durations, and lost cities. Then comes the flood. Then comes the world of later dynasties, human limits, and recoverable memory. The flood acts like a curtain. It hides what came earlier, but it also makes that hidden age more fascinating. A destroyed world becomes more powerful than a preserved one. If every detail survived, mystery would weaken. But because the world is drowned, broken and half-remembered, imagination rushes in. What cities stood there? What knowledge vanished? What rituals were lost? What did the survivor remember but never speak? Which names were washed away before any scribe could copy them? This is where modern speculation grows quickly. Some interpret the flood stories as evidence of a lost advanced civilization. Others connect them with rising sea levels, submerged Gulf landscapes, or ancient memories of regional disasters. These ideas vary in credibility. Some are cautious environmental hypotheses. Others are unsupported claims dressed as certainty. The ancient texts themselves do not describe machines, global empires, or underwater technology. They describe divine decision, flood destruction, survival, and the reshaping of human destiny. The mystery is strong enough without invention. In fact, invention can make it smaller. A fictional underwater empire gives us a spectacle. The Sumerian flood gives us something deeper, the fear that memory is always partial, that civilization depends on fragile records, and that human history may contain silences not because nothing happened, but because too much happened and the evidence was carried away. A clay tablet survives only if conditions allow it. A city survives only if water, war, salt, and time spare enough traces. A tradition survives only if scribes copy it. The flood story is a reminder that history is not everything that occurred. History is what managed not to vanish. That thought is more unsettling than any legend of sunken gold. The Sumerian flood tradition leaves us with a world cut in two. One part is visible through archaeology, text, and reconstruction. The other part lies behind a mythic wall of water. The scribes did not draw us a perfect map of the drowned age. They gave us names, fragments, divine warnings, a chosen survivor, and the sound of waters closing over cities. And in that silence, another question rises. If the flood erased the earliest cities from ordinary memory, why did the scribes preserve the names of kings said to have ruled in the impossible age that water destroyed? Why would ancient scribes give kings reigns longer than entire civilizations? In the Sumerian king list, the rulers who lived before the flood do not rule for decades. They do not even rule for centuries. Their reigns stretch across thousands, tens of thousands, and in some traditions, a total span so vast that it breaks ordinary historical imagination. These are not normal royal records. They read like messages from another kind of time. A king reigns for 28,800 years, another for 36,000, another for 43,000. The numbers feel impossible, almost cosmic. No human body can carry such a reign. No palace administration can function across such a span. No dynasty can be measured like that in ordinary history. Yet the scribes copied these names, arranged them, preserved them, and placed them at the beginning of kingship's sacred memory. Why? The easy answer is to say the numbers are fantasy, but that answer is too small. Ancient scribes were not careless children inventing large numbers because they did not know better. Mesopotamian scholars were highly trained. They worked with mathematics, astronomy, accounting, law, ritual, language, omens, and administration. Their numerical systems could be sophisticated and exact. When they wrote impossible reigns, they were not failing to understand time. They were using time symbolically. The question is not whether Alulim literally sat on a throne for 28,800 years. The question is why a culture would need a king like Alulim at all. The antediluvian kings, the rulers said to have reigned before the flood, occupy a strange territory between history and myth. Their names appear in a sequence of cities that includes Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. These are not random fantasy locations. Some are known from Mesopotamian tradition and geography. Shuruppak, for example, is a real ancient site associated in tradition with the flood survivor's father. Sippar was linked with the sun god in later Mesopotamian religion. The list blends recognizable sacred geography with reigns that no historian can treat as literal chronology. This combination is important. If everything were impossible, the tradition would float away into pure myth. If everything were ordinary, the mystery would vanish. Instead, the scribes created something in between. They attached cosmic time to named cities. They placed mythic kings inside a landscape that mattered to real people. They made the deep past feel both unreachable and anchored. That is how memory becomes sacred. Imagine a scribal school in ancient Mesopotamia. A young student sits with a lump of clay. His teacher recites names that are already old. The student presses signs into the tablet, learning not only language, but a shape of history. He writes kingship. He writes cities. He writes numbers too large for life. He is not simply copying a list. He is learning that the world has a hidden structure, that power moves according to divine order, and that the present rests upon an age almost too vast to imagine. What happens to a mind trained like that? History becomes vertical. The present is only the visible top layer. Beneath it are earlier dynasties, deeper cities, older names, sacred reigns, a lost age of gods and kings. The king list is not just a record of rulers. It is a staircase into time. Modern historians approach the text with caution. Some later rulers in the list can be connected to historical periods and political traditions, but the earliest reigns belong to mythic time. The list also served political purposes by arranging kingship as something that passed from one city to another. It gave history a single divine pattern. It could support claims of legitimacy by suggesting that rule was not merely seized, it was received, held, and transferred. But the antediluvian section does something even stranger. It places human authority in a time before normal human limits. The kings before the flood are not merely old kings. They are rulers of a world where time itself behaves differently. Their reigns suggest that the first age was not like the present age. It was larger, slower, closer to the divine, or farther from ordinary mortality. The flood then becomes not only a disaster, but a transformation of time. After the flood, reign lengths shrink. Kings become more human. History becomes more recognizable. Why would memory compress humanity after catastrophe? One interpretation is theological. The ancient world before the flood may have been imagined as closer to the gods, and therefore less bound by ordinary limits. Another interpretation is literary. The huge rains create grandeur and distance, making the first age feel sacred and unreachable. A scribal interpretation may focus on number symbolism. Mesopotamian mathematics used a sexagesimal system based on units of 60. Many antediluvian reigns are multiples that fit this numerical world. The numbers may have carried scholarly elegance, ritual weight, or cosmic meaning. None of these explanations fully empties the mystery. A number can be symbolic and still be emotionally powerful. A reign of 36,000 years tells the listener that the king belongs to deep time. It says, do not imagine this ruler as a man like your neighbor. Imagine him as part of a vanished order, a time when the border between divine and human authority was different. The names themselves also carry an aura of distance. Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, Enmengal-ana. Dumuzid the shepherd, Ensipadzid-ana, Enmendur-ana, Ubara-tutu. To modern ears, they sound like fragments from a sealed archive. To ancient scribes, they may have carried associations now, partly lost divine titles, city traditions, priestly memories, regional legends, or scholarly explanations that did not survive in full. Every name is a doorway with most of the room missing. Take Dumuzid the shepherd. The name Dumuzid also belongs to a major divine or semi-divine figure associated with shepherd imagery, fertility, death, and lamentation in Mesopotamian tradition. When such a name appears amongst ancient rulers, the boundary between king, god, hero, and mythic figure becomes difficult to draw. Was the list preserving a royal memory? A theological title? A legendary ruler? A divine name placed in human sequence? The text does not make the modern categories comfortable. That discomfort may be intentional. Ancient kingship often lived close to the sacred. The king was not usually a god in the same way across all Mesopotamian periods, but kingship carried divine sanction. Rulers built temples, performed rituals, received omens, claimed favor from gods, and represented order against chaos. In the antediluvian age, this sacred quality expands until it becomes almost overwhelming. Kings no longer look like administrators of city-states. They become pillars holding up the first world. Could the impossible reigns be monuments made of time? A stone monument can break. A temple can fall. But a number carved into tradition can make the past enormous. By giving the earliest rulers vast reigns, the scribes created a mental architecture. They built a lost world too large to enter casually. Anyone hearing the list must feel small before it. There is also a political subtlety here. If kingship began in remote sacred time, then every later ruler inherited something older than personal ambition. A king could claim power, but he could not claim to have invented power. Kingship was already ancient, already divine, already burdened with memory. This both glorified rulers and placed them under judgment. They stood within an order that existed long before them. But there is a darker side. Lists can preserve, but they can also conceal. A list gives names without lives. It says who ruled and for how long, but not what they feared, built, loved, destroyed, or misunderstood. The antediluvian kings are immense and strangely empty. Their reigns are vast, but their stories are mostly silent. It is as if the scribes rescued their names from the drowned age while leaving their worlds under water. Why preserve a name when the life behind it has vanished? Because names resist oblivion. In ancient Mesopotamia, to be named was to remain present in some form. Temples, offerings, inscriptions, and royal monuments all fought against forgetting. A destroyed king whose name survived had not fully disappeared. A forgotten king, even if he once ruled cities, was truly gone. The king list becomes an anti-flood device. It keeps names afloat. This is one of the most powerful ways to understand the text. The flood destroys the world, but the list preserves sequence. Water erases cities, but writing arranges memory. Catastrophe breaks continuity, but the scribes rebuild continuity on clay. The impossible kings may represent an ancient effort to say there was order before the rupture. There were cities before the waters. There were rulers before memory became human-sized. Modern people often search for lost kingdoms in ruins. The Sumerian scribes may have hidden one in chronology, not hidden as a secret code proving a literal underwater empire, but hidden in the way they shaped time. The lost kingdom is a world where cities existed before the flood, where kingship moved among sacred centers, where reigns expanded beyond human measure, and where memory could only survive as a list of astonishing names. It is a kingdom beneath time as much as beneath water, and the deepest ocean here may be forgetting. There is something almost tragic in the grandeur of these reigns. A king who rules for 43 of 200 years should be unforgettable. Yet what do we know of him? A name, a city, a number, and a place in sequence. The vastness does not give clarity. It creates distance. The more enormous the reign, the less human the ruler becomes. The scribes turned lost kings into constellations, bright points in darkness, meaningful in arrangement, unreachable in detail. That may be why the list still unsettles the imagination. It refuses to behave like history, yet it refuses to be dismissed as nonsense. It carries real city names and mythic durations. It links political order with sacred catastrophe. It remembers rulers no archive can fully explain. It suggests that civilization's beginning was not a small village slowly growing into a state, but a divine drama unfolding across impossible time. What ancient texts describe is an age of kings before the flood. What archaeologists know is that early Mesopotamian cities developed across long and complex periods, not through kings who lived tens of thousands of years, What historians believe is that the king list combines ideology, memory, myth, and selective historical tradition. What modern interpretations suggest ranges from symbolic time to lost cultural memory, but certainty remains out of reach. The antediluvian kings stand like statues seen through water. Their shapes are visible, their details bend, their scale is unnatural. Their meaning shifts depending on the angle of light. They are not proof of a sunken empire, yet they preserve the image of a world submerged behind mythic time. They remind us that early civilization did not only ask who ruled, it asked where authority came from, how long memory could reach, and what happened when the old world disappeared. And if the names of the first kings rose from the waters of forgetting, who were the mysterious bringers of wisdom said to emerge from the sea? Who were the strange figures said to bring wisdom from the waters? Among the most mysterious beings in Mesopotamian tradition are the Apkallu, the sages. They appear in later texts and images as guardians of knowledge, servants of divine order, and preservers of powers too old for ordinary history. Some are remembered as human sages, others are linked with fish imagery, bird imagery, protective magic, and the deep wisdom of Ea, the Akkadian form of Enki. They do not fit easily into modern categories. They are not simply gods, they are not simply priests, they are not simply monsters or heroes. They stand at the boundary between civilization and the unknown. The ancient traditions surrounding them are complex and developed across many centuries. In some Mesopotamian lists, the Apkallu belong to the time before the flood. They are associated with early kings, ancient cities, and the transmission of knowledge. In later Assyrian art, figures wearing fish cloaks or bearing ritual objects appear on palace reliefs, guarding doorways and purifying royal space. In magical texts, their names and images could carry protective force. In later Greek language Babylonian tradition, a figure called Oannes rises from the sea and teaches humanity the arts of civilization. At first glance, this sounds like the perfect proof of a lost ocean kingdom. But caution is essential. What ancient texts describe is a class of sages linked to divine wisdom, often connected with Ea, and sometimes placed in the remote age before the flood. What archaeologists know is that fish-cloaked and winged protective figures appear in Mesopotamian art, especially in later palace and ritual contexts. What historians believe is that the Apkallu traditions preserved ideas about priestly knowledge, royal protection, ancient authority, and the divine origin of civilization. What modern interpretations sometimes suggest is that these stories remember visitors from the sea, survivors of a drowned world, or symbolic teachers from a lost culture. Only the first three levels rest securely on evidence. The last belongs to interpretation. Yet even when stripped of exaggeration, the Apkallu remain astonishing. Why would wisdom be imagined as arriving from beings connected to water? To understand the power of the image, picture a stone relief in an Assyrian palace. A figure stands beside a sacred tree or doorway. He wears a long robe. In one hand, he may carry a bucket. In the other, a cone-shaped object used in ritual purification. Sometimes he has wings. Sometimes he wears the skin of a fish over his head and back, so that the fish's mouth opens above the human face like a second mask. The image is not playful. It is solemn, protective, and charged with ritual meaning. A man inside a fish, a sage inside a creature of the deep. What is being shown? Not a zoological fact, not a literal fishman walking through palace halls. The image belongs to symbolic and ritual art. Fish could signify water, abundance, purification, and connection to Ea. A fish-cloaked figure may represent a sage carrying the authority of the deep into human space. He is not merely dressed strangely. He is clothed in a sign of origin. The costume makes him a threshold. The human face looks outward, but the fish skin points to another realm. The body stands in the palace, but the symbol belongs to water. The figure guards the king, yet his power comes from a source older than kingship. He carries ritual objects as if wisdom must be applied, sprinkled, activated, and renewed. Could this be one of the most ancient images of knowledge as protection? Modern people often imagine knowledge as information. Ancient Mesopotamians often treated knowledge as power. The right word could heal or curse. The right ritual could purify or protect. The right omen could guide a king. The right measurement could build a temple. The right name could summon or restrain unseen forces. Knowledge was not neutral. It was dangerous, sacred, and highly controlled. The Apkallu belonged to this world. They were not teachers in the modern classroom sense. They were culture bearers, ritual masters, guardians of cosmic order. Their association with the remote past gave them authority. Their link with Ea connected them to divine intelligence. Their appearance in protective art made them active presences in royal and sacred spaces. They did not merely explain civilization. They defended it. That distinction matters. A simple civilization bringer gives humanity tools and then disappears. The Apkallu remain embedded in ritual protection. They stand at thresholds because civilization is always threatened. Disorder can enter through gates, dreams, omens, illness, demons, rebellion, bad speech, and divine anger. A king's palace needs more than soldiers. It needs invisible defense. The sages of the deep become guardians against forces no army can see. This is why their oceanic association is so powerful. The deep is not only a place where knowledge begins, it is also a place from which danger can rise. Water purifies, but water can flood. The same hidden realm that contains wisdom also touches chaos. A sage connected to the waters must know how to separate blessing from destruction. In later tradition, the Apkallu of the antediluvian age are sometimes contrasted with sages or scholars of later time. The earliest ones seem greater, closer to divine sources, more powerful. After the flood, knowledge continues, but it becomes mediated through human experts. The pattern is striking. First comes direct wisdom from a sacred age, then catastrophe, then human scholarship tries to preserve what remains. This gives the scribal profession a dramatic identity. The scholar is not just a clerk. He is heir to the sages, the exorcist, diviner, lamentation priest, astronomer, or temple expert belongs to a chain of guarded knowledge stretching back toward the time when wisdom came from the deep. The clay tablet on the table is not merely a document, it is a fragment of an inheritance. To copy a ritual correctly is to keep an ancient current flowing. What if the real lost kingdom is a lost order of knowledge? Not a city of stone beneath the ocean, but a body of sacred expertise imagined as coming from a realm ordinary people could never enter. The Apkallu transformed the hidden waters into a library without shelves, an archive beneath reality itself. Their bodies become the bridge. Their fish cloaks become the sign. Their rituals become the doorway. The later story of Oannes intensifies this image. According to a Babylonian tradition reported in Greek by Berossus, Oannes was a strange being who emerged from the sea and taught humans writing, sciences, arts, city building, law, agriculture, and civilized life. At night, he returned to the water. This account is late and filtered through Greek language writing, so it cannot simply be treated as early Sumerian testimony. It reflects Babylonian learned tradition as preserved in a different historical context, but its imagery is unforgettable. A teacher from the sea, appearing at the beginning of civilization. Why did this image survive so long? Perhaps because it solved a profound problem. Civilization is too complex to feel accidental. Writing, law, measurement, ritual, astronomy, agriculture, and kingship appear to ancient minds as gifts too great to belong only to human trial and error. To explain their origin, tradition imagines a messenger from beyond ordinary humanity. The sea becomes the place from which that messenger arrives because the sea is foreign, ancient, dangerous, and sacred. It is the edge of the known world and the mouth of the unknown. This does not mean an amphibious race created Mesopotamian civilization. That is modern fantasy unless evidence appears. The stronger reading is that the sea-born teacher symbolizes the divine origin of culture and the foreignness of wisdom itself. True knowledge feels as if it comes from elsewhere. Still, the imagery invites unease. If sages came from the waters, did they bring everything, or only what humanity was allowed to receive? Were some arts held back? Were some formulas too dangerous? Did the flood erase part of their instruction? Ancient Mesopotamian texts often treat knowledge as restricted. Some rituals are for trained experts, some names are powerful, some divine decisions are hidden. The world is not transparent. Wisdom is given, but never completely. The Apkallu occupy this half-open door. They teach and conceal. They protect and intimidate. They belong to the human world and yet exceed it. Their forms combine man, fish, bird, and divine symbolism. Their presence in palaces suggests that kings wanted to surround themselves not only with wealth and soldiers, but with ancient intelligence made visible in stone. Imagine walking through such a palace corridor at night. Torchlight shakes across carved slabs. The fish-cloaked sages stare without blinking. Their hands are frozen in ritual action. The king sleeps somewhere deeper inside. Outside are enemies, storms, omens, and the vast uncertainty of empire. But at the threshold stand beings older than the kingdom, invoking waters older than the city, guarding power with the memory of the deep. This is not decoration, it is theology carved into architecture. The Apkallu also reveal a Mesopotamian fear that civilization can forget its own source. If knowledge is not renewed, copied, purified, and guarded, it decays. A ritual mispronounced loses force. A tablet broken loses instruction. A king without counsel becomes dangerous. A city without wisdom becomes vulnerable. The sages from the waters remind the palace that authority depends on something deeper than command. In that sense, Their mystery is not only ancient, it is human. Every civilization wonders where its knowledge came from. Every culture inherits tools it did not invent personally. Every generation receives language, law, measurement, myth, and craft from the dead. The Apkallu personify that inheritance. They are ancestral intelligence given form. They are the memory of teachers whose names have become more than human. They are the deep past walking into the present, wearing the skin of the waters. And this may explain why modern audiences are drawn to them. They look like evidence of a secret. They seem to say that humanity was taught. But the deeper question is not whether strange beings physically walked out of the gulf carrying blueprints. The deeper question is why ancient Mesopotamia imagined wisdom itself as something that had to cross from a hidden realm into human hands. Perhaps because knowledge always feels miraculous once its origin is forgotten. A child born into writing sees signs as normal. A scribe trained in their sacred history sees writing as a gift from beyond ordinary life. A modern viewer sees a fish-cloaked figure and asks whether it represents an alien, a survivor, a priest, or a myth. The ancient answer may be more subtle. It represents the fact that civilization is never merely human in its own imagination. It is always received from something deeper than itself. The sages from the sea do not prove a lost underwater kingdom. They prove that Mesopotamian tradition imagined wisdom as emerging from watery, divine, and pre-flood depths. They show that the deep was not only a place of origin or destruction, it was also the source of instruction. The same waters that could erase cities could also send teachers. That is the unsettling balance. The ocean hides. The ocean destroys. The ocean remembers. The ocean teaches. And if ancient wisdom was carried through symbols, rituals, and sacred geography, could the landscape itself have been a map written in water? What if the map to the hidden kingdom was never carved on stone, but written in water that refused to stay still? Southern Mesopotamia was not a landscape with fixed edges. It was a living puzzle of rivers, marshes, canals, mudflats, lagoons, islands, reed forests, and shifting shorelines. To modern eyes, a map is supposed to be stable. A city appears as a dot. A river appears as a line. A coast appears as a border. But for the ancient Sumerians, the world itself did not behave like a finished drawing. Water moved. Land appeared. Land vanished. Channels changed course. Marshes expanded and retreated. The boundary between earth and sea was not a wall. It was a negotiation. Could this unstable landscape have shaped the deepest mysteries of Sumerian thought? Imagine standing in the far south of Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. The horizon is low and wide. There are no mountains to hold the world in place. The sky presses down like an enormous bowl. The rivers move slowly through flat country, carrying silt from distant islands. Reeds grow taller than a man. Birds rise in clouds from the marsh. Boats pass through channels that only experienced people know. A stranger could become lost where land and water interlace so completely that walking, rowing, and wading become parts of the same journey. In such a place, geography itself teaches uncertainty. A road can disappear into mud. A bank can collapse. A field can turn salty. A canal can become choked with silt. A village can shift its dependence from one channel to another. What appears solid in one generation may become wetland in another. What appears remote may become reachable by boat. What appears sacred may be sacred precisely because it stands where order has been wrestled out of watery confusion. This is not fantasy. Ancient southern Mesopotamian cities depended on water management. Irrigation allowed agriculture to flourish in a difficult environment. Canals moved water into fields and connected settlements. Rivers fed the system, but also threatened it. Too little water meant hunger. Too much water meant destruction. Poor drainage and salt could damage land. Human life required constant attention to flows, banks, gates, ditches, and timing. Civilization was not built beside water. It was built through water. That fact changes how we hear the myths. When Sumerian texts speak of the deep, of divine waters, of flood, of pure lands across the sea, and of gods associated with canals, creation, or purification, they are not speaking from a dry imagination. They come from people whose entire world depended on controlling something that could never be completely controlled. Water was not background scenery. Water was fate. What if the lost kingdom is hidden in the old shape of the land itself? Modern coastlines can deceive us. A person looking at the Persian Gulf today might imagine that its outline has always been the same. But coastlines shift across long periods of time. Rivers deposit sediment, seas rise and fall, marshes migrate. Ancient settlement zones can become buried under alluvium, covered by later occupation, or submerged beyond easy recovery. In the deep past, areas near the Gulf may have looked very different from the present coastline. This does not prove that a grand ocean empire lies waiting under the waves, but it does make one point unavoidable. The ancient world that gave birth to these traditions cannot be reconstructed by simply looking at a modern map. A vanished landscape does not need to be mythical to become mysterious. There may have been fishing communities, seasonal camps, marsh dwellers, boat routes, shrines, and small settlements in places that are now difficult to locate. Some may have left few traces. Others may be buried under meters of a sediment. The archaeological record in river delta environments is always incomplete because water and mud are both builders and destroyers. They preserve certain things and erase others. They hide the past not with intention, but with process. This is where myth and archaeology begin to touch without becoming the same. The ancient texts do not say, "Here is a drowned map of prehistoric settlements." They do not give coordinates. They do not describe sonar images or sunken stone roads. They speak through gods, cities, sacred waters, and catastrophic floods. Archaeology does not confirm a hidden ocean kingdom. It studies sites, layers, artifacts, settlement patterns, and environmental change. Yet both the texts and the land point toward the same emotional reality. Southern Mesopotamia existed in a world where water could conceal history. A landscape that changes will produce stories about disappearance. Consider the marshes. To outsiders, they could appear like a labyrinth. To those who knew them, they were home, resource, protection, and passage. Reeds provided building material. Fish and birds supplied food. Boats moved through watery corridors. The marsh could hide fugitives, rebels, traders, priests, animals, and spirits of the imagination. It was neither city nor wilderness in a simple sense. It was a world between worlds. Could the marsh have served as a living model for the unseen deep? The Abzu was cosmic and sacred, but its imagery may have resonated with daily experiences of hidden water. Beneath the ground lay moisture. Beyond the fields lay marsh. Beyond the marsh lay open water and gulf routes. At the temple, sacred basins made water present in controlled form. Everywhere, the visible surface hinted at something beneath or beyond it. This creates a layered map. At the center is the temple, the ordered house of the god. Around it is the city, protected by walls, rituals, and labor. Around the city are canals and fields, the productive zone where human effort works with divine permission. Beyond that are marshes, uncertain and fertile, rich and dangerous. Beyond the marshes are trade waters leading to distant lands. Beneath all of it is the imagined deep, the hidden reservoir of sacred power. This is not a map drawn north to south. It is a map drawn from certainty to mystery. The temple represents controlled contact. The city represents social order. The fields represent survival. The marsh represents ambiguity. The sea represents distance. The Abzu represents origin. Each zone carries its own emotional charge. To move through the landscape is to move through different states of meaning. This may explain why Sumerian stories feel so geographically strange to modern readers. A divine place can be beneath the earth, across the sea, inside a temple name, or attached to a city. The sacred is not locked into one physical category. It flows between categories, just as water flows between river, canal, marsh, basin, and sea. Water makes borders porous. That porosity shaped politics as well. Cities competed for resources, prestige, divine favor, and control of land. Canals could create wealth or conflict. A canal was not merely infrastructure. It was power made visible. Whoever organized water could feed people, mobilize labor, and claim authority. In such a world, the ruler was not only a warrior or judge. He was a guardian of flow. He had to maintain the conditions under which life could continue. This gives the idea of kingship near sacred water a deeper, practical background. A king who cannot manage water cannot protect the city. A temple that blesses water helps sanctify the system that sustains society. A god of wisdom and fresh water becomes central because wisdom is not abstract. It is the knowledge of how to keep life from collapsing. What if divine wisdom originally felt like correct water management? That may sound ordinary, but for ancient people it was anything but ordinary. To know when to dig, where to direct channels, how to maintain fields, how to organize workers, how to store grain, how to prevent famine, and how to interpret dangerous signs was to hold the city together. The distance between engineering and ritual was not as wide as modern minds assume. Both were ways of imposing order on uncertainty. The map written in water was also a map written in labor. Thousands of hands cleared canals, built embankments, carried baskets, shaped bricks, and repaired damage. The great mystery of civilization is often told through kings and gods, but the hidden foundation was work. Every city was a collective act against dissolution. Every harvest was a temporary victory. Every temple platform rising above the plain declared that humans had created a center where nature offered no permanent center of its own. This makes the idea of a lost kingdom more intimate. A kingdom can be lost not only by sinking beneath the ocean, but by losing the conditions that made it visible. A river shifts and the harbor dies. Salinity rises and fields weaken. Trade routes change and a sacred city fades. Sediment covers a settlement. Later, people remember the name, but no longer remember the world around it. The kingdom has not vanished into fantasy. It has vanished into altered relationships. The land itself becomes an archive with missing pages, unlike a stone mountain region, where ruins may stand exposed for centuries. Southern Mesopotamia often hides its past in mounds, alluvium, and erosion. Mud brick melts back into mud. Reeds decay. Wood disappears. Waterlogged zones preserve some materials while destroying others. The archaeological record is not silent because nothing happened. It is selective because environment decides what can speak. This should make modern certainty humble. When people claim too quickly that every mystery has been solved, they underestimate how much has been erased. When people claim too quickly that a lost, advanced ocean empire must exist, they leap beyond evidence. The truth is more difficult and more compelling. Ancient Mesopotamia was born in a landscape where disappearance was normal. Memory was fragile, and sacred stories gave shape to things that water could hide. The hidden kingdom may be a real geography transformed into myth. It may be a mythic geography inspired by real water. It may be both at once. What matters is that Sumerian tradition did not imagine civilization as standing on dry certainty. It imagined civilization at the edge of the deep, dependent on forces beneath control. The rivers brought silt and danger. The marshes concealed life and threat. The Gulf opened roads to distant lands. The temple gathered water into sacred form. The scribes pressed wet clay into memory, as though knowledge itself had to be rescued from dissolution. A map written in water can never be held still. That is why the mystery continues to move. It is not located only in one ruin, one myth, one city, or one god. It flows through the whole ancient environment, the changing coast, the sacred basin, the canal, the marsh path, the buried mound, the sea route, the flood deposit, the temple name, the broken tablet. Each is a sign of a world where the border between land and water was also the border between memory and forgetting. But if the Sumerian deep was a sacred geography shaped by real landscapes, why have so many modern interpreters tried to turn it into something like Atlantis? Why does every hidden watery realm eventually get compared to Atlantis? The moment an ancient text speaks of a deep place, a vanished age, a flood, a sacred island, or wisdom from the sea, modern imagination begins to move in a familiar direction. It looks for a drowned empire. It imagines towers beneath blue darkness, temple gates covered in coral, and lost priests guarding forbidden knowledge below the ocean floor. The name Atlantis rises almost automatically, even when the ancient text being discussed belongs to an entirely different world. This is one of the most dangerous points in the mystery, not because comparison is forbidden. Comparisons can be useful. They reveal patterns in human imagination. They show how different civilizations wrestled with water, memory, catastrophe, and lost golden ages. But comparison becomes distortion when one story is forced to become another. The Abzu is not Atlantis. Dilmun is not Atlantis. The Sumerian flood tradition is not Atlantis. The Apkallu are not Atlantean scientists in fish costumes. These ideas may be dramatic, but drama is not evidence. And yet, the temptation is powerful. Atlantis entered Western memory through Greek philosophical writing, where it appears as an island power destroyed in a catastrophe. Over time, later readers transformed it into a symbol of lost civilization. Some treated it as moral allegory. Others searched for it as geography. In modern esoteric writing, fantasy, documentaries, and internet speculation, Atlantis became a container for almost every lost world anyone wanted to imagine. It could be placed in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, Antarctica, the Caribbean, the Sahara, or beneath almost any sea. Atlantis became less a place than a hunger. That hunger attaches itself to Sumer because Sumer feels old enough to hide anything. It has the first cities, early writing, flood traditions, mysterious gods, strange king lists, and fragmentary tablets. It has the atmosphere of beginnings. For many modern viewers, anything from Sumer seems to come from a sealed chamber of human memory. If an ancient Sumerian text mentions the deep, the leap happens quickly. Perhaps this is the oldest version of Atlantis, but that leap skips the actual Sumerian world. The Abzu, in Mesopotamian religion, is not described as a political island empire that attacked other nations and sank as punishment. It is a sacred, deep associated, especially with fresh water, wisdom, creation, purification, and the divine realm of Enki or Maya. Its meaning belongs to Mesopotamian cosmology, temple ritual, and the environment of riverine southern Iraq. It is not a Greek island narrative. It is not a naval empire. It is not a technological civilization hidden beneath the waves. So why do people keep merging them? One reason is visual. The human mind loves images more than categories. House of the Deep becomes an underwater palace. Sages from the waters become survivors of a drowned civilization. Flood before history becomes evidence that an advanced world was destroyed. Pure land across the sea becomes a lost island paradise. Each image seems to point toward the same cinematic possibility, even when the texts themselves point in different directions. Another reason is emotional. The idea of a lost advanced kingdom comforts and unsettles at the same time. It suggests that humanity may once have known more than it knows now. It turns history into a treasure hunt. It offers the possibility that modern people are not moving forward from ignorance into knowledge, but trying to recover something ancient and forgotten. That reversal is intoxicating. What if the greatest wisdom lies behind us? Ancient cultures themselves often imagined earlier ages as greater, purer, closer to gods, or filled with longer-lived beings. Sumerian and Mesopotamian traditions contain this feeling in their own way. The time before the flood is larger than ordinary time. The earliest kings are greater in scale. The oldest sages carry special authority. The first cities seem wrapped in sacred distance. But this does not automatically mean the texts preserve technical records of a lost global civilization. It means ancient people gave mythic depth to origins. Modern misreading often happens when symbolic depth is mistaken for literal engineering. A myth says a god rules the deep. A modern interpreter imagines a submarine palace. A text says wisdom comes from the waters. A modern interpreter imagines a lost academy below the sea. A tradition remembers pre-flood kings. A modern interpreter imagines rulers of a forgotten superstate. The movement is understandable, but it changes the ancient material into something it never clearly says. This is where responsible storytelling must slow down. What ancient texts describe should be allowed to remain ancient. They speak through divine names, ritual concepts, sacred geography, symbolic numbers, and mythic time. What archaeologists know should be allowed to remain material. They work with excavations, pottery, settlement layers, bones, inscriptions, seals, sediment, and environmental evidence. What historians believe should be allowed to remain interpretive but disciplined. They compare texts, languages, political contexts, scribal traditions, and cultural patterns. What modern speculation suggests should be named honestly as speculation. The mystery does not die when these boundaries are respected. It becomes stronger. A false certainty is easy. It says, "This tablet proves Atlantis." It excites the imagination for a moment, then collapses when evidence is questioned. A deeper mystery says, why did so many ancient cultures imagine lost beginnings, sacred waters, and vanished ages? That question does not collapse. It grows. It leads into psychology, religion, ecology, memory, trauma, and the way civilizations explain their own fragility. The Atlantis comparison reveals more about modern people than about Sumer. Modern culture lives with the fear of collapse, rising seas, ruined cities, forgotten technologies, broken archives, climate anxiety, and lost languages all haunt the imagination. When people look at ancient flood myths, they see their own fears reflected back. When they hear of a divine deep, they think of unexplored ocean trenches. When they read of long-lost kings, they imagine civilizations erased from the record. The old texts become mirrors, but mirrors can deceive. The Sumerian scribes were not writing for modern treasure hunters. They were preserving sacred traditions, royal ideology, ritual memory, and theological imagination. Their world did not divide cleanly between myth and history in modern terms. A story could be meaningful without being literal in every detail. A place could be real and symbolic. A number could be precise within a scribal system and impossible as biological fact. A god's house could be made of bricks and connected to a cosmic realm. To read such texts well, one must accept layered meaning. The Abzu can be sacred water without being Atlantis. Dilmun can be linked to real Gulf trade and still function as mythic paradise. The flood can reflect environmental terror without proving a worldwide oceanic empire. The Apkallu can symbolize ancient wisdom without becoming evidence of non-human visitors. These interpretations are not dull. They are demanding. They require patience with ambiguity. And ambiguity is exactly what the ancient world gives us. The problem with many modern lost kingdom theories is that they remove ambiguity too quickly. They decide in advance that every symbol hides a literal secret. Then they search the texts only for confirmation. Water means ocean. Deep means submerged. Gods mean advanced beings. Long rains mean unknown science. Flood means global destruction. Fish cloaks mean aquatic people. This method does not listen to the ancient world. It uses the ancient world as decoration for a modern myth. There is a different way to approach the mystery. Instead of asking, Which lost empire does this prove, ask? What kind of world imagined this symbol? The answer leads into the marshes, the canals, the temple basins, the changing gulf, the fear of flood, the authority of priests, the political meaning of kingship, the fragility of clay tablets, and the sacred power of water in a river civilization. The mystery becomes rooted, not weaker. It gains soil, mud, and breath. A rooted mystery can survive scrutiny. This is why Sumer does not need to become Atlantis. It is already strange enough. A civilization writing in clay more than 5,000 years ago imagined divine waters beneath the world, kingship descending from heaven, gods who shaped human destiny, cities before the flood, sages linked with the sea, and sacred lands across distant waters. None of that requires invention to feel extraordinary. The real danger is not skepticism. The real danger is replacing Sumer with fantasy so completely that the actual ancient voices disappear. Think of a broken tablet in a museum case. Its edges are worn. Its signs are difficult to read. A scholar studies the grammar, the parallels, the damage, the historical context. A storyteller senses the atmosphere, the unanswered questions, the emotional weight. A careless interpreter sees only a blank space where anything can be inserted. But a broken tablet is not an invitation to invent without limit. It is a surviving witness. Its silence matters, but so do its words. What if the missing lines are not permission to claim anything, but a reminder of how fragile knowledge is? The ocean has become the modern symbol of that fragility. Most of the deep sea is difficult to explore. Shipwrecks vanish. Coastlines drown. Human bodies cannot survive in pressure and darkness. When people imagine the lost kingdom beneath the deepest ocean, they are imagining the ultimate archive of the unreachable. They want the ocean to keep what history lost. But ancient Mesopotamia offers a subtler archive. The deep is not only a place below waves, it is the hidden layer beneath civilization itself. It is the unseen source of order, the feared force of destruction, the realm of divine wisdom, the memory of landscapes that changed, and the symbolic depth from which culture rises. Calling it Atlantis may actually make it smaller. Atlantis is one famous story. The Abzu is a different kind of mystery. Atlantis asks where a vanished island went. The Abzu asks where wisdom comes from. Atlantis asks whether a civilization sank. The Abzu asks what lies beneath reality. Atlantis is remembered through Greek philosophical narrative. The Abzu belongs to a Mesopotamian sacred world of water, temple, ritual, and divine intelligence. One can compare them carefully, but they should not be fused into the same thing. The hidden kingdom, if it exists in the Sumerian imagination, is not a lost city waiting for a modern flag to be planted in its ruins. It is a kingdom of meaning. It is made of water, memory, divine order, fear, longing, and the human refusal to accept that all beginnings are gone forever. That may be why the myth continues to pull at us. People do not only want evidence, they want contact with origin. They want to believe that beneath history's broken surface there is a deeper chamber where the first answers remain intact. Sumerian texts seem to promise that chamber, then refuse to open it completely. They give us the deep, but not a map. They give us gods, but not simple explanations. They give us ancient names, but not the full worlds behind them. So perhaps the greatest misreading is not comparing Sumer to Atlantis. The greatest misreading is thinking the mystery must become literal before it can matter. If a sacred deep shaped the first stories of civilization, and if modern myths keep trying to turn that deep into a drowned empire, what is the hidden kingdom really asking us to remember? What if the kingdom, hidden beneath the deepest ocean, was never waiting to be found with machines? Not because the mystery is false, not because the ancient scribes imagined nothing, not because the waters of Mesopotamia were empty of memory, but because the kingdom may have been hidden in a way modern eyes are not trained to see. It may have been hidden beneath language, beneath ritual, beneath drowned landscapes, beneath sacred symbols, beneath the oldest fear that everything humans build rests on something unseen. The Sumerian texts do not give us a simple treasure map. They do not say that an empire of stone towers lies below the deepest sea. They do not describe glowing cities under ocean pressure, or machines preserved in crystal halls, or royal roads descending into blue darkness. Those images belong mostly to modern fantasy. They are powerful, but they are not what the ancient tablets securely say. What the ancient texts do describe is stranger. They describe the Ebzu, the sacred deep, the hidden watery realm associated with Enki, wisdom, purification, creation, and divine knowledge. They describe Eridu, a city of beginnings, where kingship was remembered as descending into the human world. They describe the house of the Abzu, a temple on land named for a realm below visible reality. They describe Dilmun, a pure land across the waters, both mythic and connected to real Gulf horizons. They describe flood traditions in which the old world vanishes beneath rising waters. They describe kings who ruled in impossible time before catastrophe. They describe sages linked to the sea, bearers of wisdom from a realm ordinary humans could not enter. None of this is ordinary, yet none of it needs to be forced into a false certainty. Archaeologists know that southern Mesopotamia was a landscape shaped by rivers, marshes, canals, shifting sediments, changing coastlines, and the long struggle to keep civilization alive in a watery world. They know that Eridu was an ancient sacred center. They know that Mesopotamian cities grew through labor, agriculture, temples, administration, trade, and environmental pressure. They know that flood deposits exist at some sites, but not as proof of one universal flood covering the planet. They know that the Gulf region changed across deep time, and that some ancient landscapes may now be buried, altered, or submerged. Historians believe the myths preserve theology, political memory, ritual meaning, and reflections of real environmental experience. They study the texts not as modern reports, but as ancient ways of ordering the world. A king list can be political. A flood story can be theological. A temple name can be symbolic. A paradise land can be both geographic memory and sacred imagination. Modern interpretations go further. Some suggest that Sumerian stories may preserve memories of drowned coastlines or lost communities near the ancient Gulf. That possibility is worth considering carefully. Human groups almost certainly lived in places later transformed by water in many parts of the world, but other interpretations leap too far, claiming that the tablets prove an advanced oceanic empire, an Atlantean source of civilization, or beings from a hidden submarine world. The evidence does not support those claims as fact. But the mystery does not become smaller when exaggeration is removed. It becomes deeper, because the true question is not only, was there a lost kingdom under the ocean? The true question is, why did one of humanity's earliest literate civilizations imagine its deepest wisdom as coming from below the waters? That question leads into the oldest chambers of human imagination. Water is the perfect keeper of memory. It reflects, but it also conceals. It gives life, but it can erase life without hatred. It shapes clay into tablets, then can dissolve those tablets back into mud. It carries boats and corpses, trade goods and prayers, fish and floodwater, fertility and ruin. To a people living between the Tigris and Euphrates, water was never one thing. It was blessing and threat at the same time. So when Sumerian scribes wrote of sacred depths, they were not decorating stories with exotic scenery. They were naming the force beneath their world. Every city in southern Mesopotamia was a victory against disappearance. Mud brick walls had to be rebuilt. Canals had to be cleared. Fields had to be watered without being drowned. Temples had to be maintained. Records had to be copied. Names had to be preserved. The people who created civilization there understood something modern people often forget. Order is temporary unless renewed. That is why the hidden kingdom matters. It represents the place from which order rises and to which order can return. The Abzu is not merely a pool beneath the earth. It is the thought that civilization has a source deeper than human pride. Eridu is not merely an old mound. It is the memory that beginnings become sacred when later generations no longer fully understand them. The Iabzu is not merely a temple name. It is the idea that a doorway can exist between visible walls and invisible waters. Dilmun is not merely an island or a paradise. It is the longing for a pure place across the horizon, a place made fertile by divine water, but still touched by danger. The flood is not merely a storm. It is the fear that the world can be unmade. The ancient kings are not merely impossible rulers. They are monuments of time, names floating from an age ordinary chronology cannot hold. The sages from the sea are not proof of fantasy beings. They are images of knowledge crossing from hidden depth into human hands. Put together, these traditions create something extraordinary. They create a kingdom without a single capital, a kingdom spread across symbols, deep water, first city, sacred temple, distant land, drowned age, impossible rain, sea-born wisdom, shifting landscape, broken tablet. It is not a kingdom in the political sense. It is a kingdom of origin, a hidden order beneath the surface of history. And perhaps that is why the story has survived. Modern people live with a different ocean, but the fear is familiar. We know that archives can burn, languages can vanish, cities can be abandoned, coastlines can change, civilizations can collapse while believing themselves permanent. We explore the deep sea with cameras and sonar, yet most of the human past remains unreachable, not because it lies under water only, but because time itself behaves like an ocean. It covers, pressures, scatters, and transforms. What do we really mean when we ask for the lost kingdom beneath the deepest ocean? Maybe we mean a place where the first answers still exist, a place untouched by broken tablets, missing lines, and ruined cities, a place where the first scribes, the first priests, the first kings, and the first stories remain complete. We imagine that if we could descend far enough, we would find not only stones, but certainty. But ancient Sumer does not offer certainty, it offers a sacred deep. That is a more demanding gift. Certainty ends the search. The deep keeps the search alive. It asks us to stand at the edge of what can be known and still listen. It asks us to separate evidence from invention without losing wonder. It asks us to recognize that mythology is not useless because it is not modern history. Myth can preserve emotional truths, cultural memory, sacred logic, and human questions that survive long after temples fall. The lost kingdom may be hidden because it is not only a place, it is a way of remembering. In that kingdom, water is not empty. It holds creation. It holds danger. It holds divine secrets. It holds the possibility that knowledge entered civilization from somewhere humans could not command. It holds the terror that everything made can be unmade. It holds the hope that something can survive even after the flood, a name, a tablet, a ritual, a story, a question. This is why the Sumerian mystery still has power after thousands of years. The scribes wrote on clay, one of the most fragile and enduring materials ever used by human beings. Clay can break, clay can be buried, clay can survive fire. Clay can sleep under earth for millennia and then speak again through signs no living tongue remembers naturally. The tablet is almost a miniature version of the lost kingdom itself, born from mud, marked with memory, buried in darkness, waiting to be read. Perhaps the deepest ocean is not made of salt water. Perhaps it is the silence between what happened and what survived. Beneath that silence are lives with no names, cities with no records, songs with no singers, rituals no priest can perform, languages no child speaks, and landscapes no map can restore. The Sumerian texts do not recover all of that. They give fragments, but fragments can be enough to reveal the outline of a lost world. And yet the final question remains untouched. If the hidden kingdom is symbolic, why does it feel so real? If it is only myth, why does it seem to remember something older than myth? If it is partly memory, what exactly was remembered? A drowned shoreline, a sacred marshland, a vanished ritual center, a prehistoric homeland near ancient waters, or the universal human knowledge that life itself rises from darkness and returns to it. No tablet answers completely. Maybe that is intentional. Maybe the ancient scribes were not trying to solve the mystery for us. Maybe they were preserving the door. They carved enough into clay to show that beneath the human world lay a deeper order, but not enough to make that order ordinary. They left the waters dark. They left Enki in his hidden realm. They left Eridu glowing at the beginning. They left Dilmun across the horizon. They left the flood as a wall in memory. They left the sages half human, half symbol, standing at the threshold of knowledge. Whether these stories preserve sacred belief, environmental memory, symbolic teaching, or fragments of humanity's earliest struggle to understand its own origins, they continue to ask something that archaeology alone cannot fully answer, not simply where the lost kingdom was, but why human beings keep searching for it beneath the waters, and if the oldest scribes believed wisdom came from a hidden deep below the world. What did they know about the darkness that we have forgotten? Ben ko the copy tuan bo trong kung train.